Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Stewart. I'm with the Recording Academy Songwriter and Composers Wing. And welcome to Protecting Your Art. And we have some amazing panelists to learn from today. Jazz creators are such a significant part of our membership that we could not be more proud to partner with the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers. And I'd like to introduce you to their managing director and our moderator today, Erica von Kleist. And Erica is a composer herself, as well as a saxophonist. She's also on the faculty of the Manhattan School of Music. Erica, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. It is an absolute pleasure for ISJAC to be partnering with the Recording Academy Songwriters and Composers Wing and the Music Licensing Collective on this very important and informative webinar. I am so grateful for this incredible panel of professionals I'm going to be introducing you to in a moment. Just a little backstory on how this idea came about. Obviously, the idea of talking about protecting your music is not new. This is something that's a conversation that goes on in professional circles all the time, especially among musicians, because we come at it from so many different angles. But we wanted to create a panel that could discuss music protection from both a technical point of view and also an artistic / anecdotal point of view, which is why we have such a great panel here this evening or this morning, wherever you're tuning in today. We have joining us currently from Italy, we have Nicole Zaritis, who is a Grammy-winning vocalist, songwriter, composer, producer. I wish I could have enough time to speak the amazing things that I could say for hours about Nicole. But Nicole is also a newly elected governor of the New York chapter of the Recording Academy as well. So she has many ties to this, this evening's discussion. Thank you so much, Nicole, for being here. I want to move on and introduce Ryan Truesdell, a colleague of mine and also a board member here at the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers. Ryan is an incredible curator of music and composer and all of the things, but specifically for the Gil Evans project, which has been a huge focus of his for several years now. And he's also been a co-producer for Maria Schneider, among many other phenomenal artists. We're so grateful for your expertise here, Ryan. Welcome, Ryan Truesdell. We also have Brian Carter, who is a jack of many trades and an expert of all of them, from being a world-class drummer to a Tony-winning orchestrator and a Grammy-winning orchestrator as well, and all of the things, currently working on many projects. Most recently was the music director of Good Night and Good Luck on Broadway with George Clooney. And a wonderful colleague of mine, and I get to share the stage with him in various projects and feel so grateful for that. Welcome, Brian Carter. And last but not least, we have Jamie Dominguez, who is representing the Music Licensing Collective as the National Director of Industry Relations at the Music Licensing Collective. Jamie, I'm looking forward to learning more about your backstory, because you are the lone person on the panel here who's not a full-time artist musician, but you do come at this with somewhat of a creative background, having gotten a degree in journalism, and now you're in the music industry. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. So welcome, Jamie. Thank you for being here. So we're going to kick it off. We have so many questions we want to ask you all and pick your brains, and there's just so much to get through. But I think one of the first things I'd like to start with is with Jamie, particularly because you are, the one here who is, sort of the official steeped in industry person who's doing this from an industry perspective primarily. From your viewpoint, why is this session today so important, particularly for independent, self-published, self-administered songwriters and composers? Like, why is this conversation so important today?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is, I would say, a conversation that every songwriter, every composer needs to hear, because just a little bit more about my background. I come from, I've been in the business for, I guess, 25 years now. And 19 of those years, I was at a performing rights organization, and on the creative side, signing songwriters and composers and producers, anybody who really was, writing music. So creating music and behind, really behind the scenes more so than the artists themselves. Of course, many of them were artists as well. But I think from a songwriter composer perspective, I spent basically all of my career. I always like to say I'm a creative Sherpa, just sort of guiding them and explaining and unraveling the very convoluted, confusing, nuanced world of royalty income and all the things that are not why you get into music. But if you want to sustain a living being a creator, and be able to tour and do all of these things and make a living, it's so important that you understand how it works. And I find, I think throughout all of my career, I found that it's the one thing that most songwriters and even some people on the business side don't really understand because it is so complex. So yeah, so it's super important just so that songwriters and composers can be a little more aware and understand how revenue flows and what revenue streams they can access and how to collect their money.
I think that you kind of nailed it. Just from an artist perspective, being a composer myself, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of overwhelm with so many different angles. So we're glad you're going to be here to help untangle some of those today. Um, Speaking of being educated in music business aspects, including protecting your music, publishing, copyright, licensing, um, you know, the other three panelists all went to school for music and in higher education, all have degrees in music, in various capacities. And I kind of want to start with Nicole. So Nicole, did you have any formal training on music, uh, protecting your music? Actually, to back up a little bit, first of all, give us a little bit of perspective on what you're working on right now, if you have any new projects or anything that you're focusing on right now. And if anything that you're doing currently is tying into these thoughts about protecting your music, and do you have formal training on protecting your music? How are you going about this with some of your new work?
Well, Jamie said it perfectly. It really is overwhelming, no matter where you are in your career, to keep track of all the different places you have to register your creative works. For me, I never learned about it in school. I also went to NYU as a classical voice major, so I wasn't even writing music when I was in school. And only later, when I got my master's of business, I got an MBA during COVID. I realized, I really have to get my admin together. And for most of my career, I would get like $5 checks from BMI and go, why am I spending all this time registering my songs if I've never seen $1 in my life? But then when you really need it, it's great to have it. So I learned myself, which is kind of, I'm sure many artists here, the independent road is essentially that, self-taught, learn the hard way, make mistakes, register things wrong, choose names, publishing names that you never thought you would want to use again. Um, and so on and so forth. So I learned the hard way, and now I'm back at NYU teaching there, and I teach in the contemporary vocal department, and they have an entire course on just that, because I promised I would never go back into higher education unless I actually went into a program that taught people how to be a living musician, because I learned everything on my own. And currently what I'm working on is I've coined something called the modern songbook. It's jazz and beyond. It's to create a space for songwriters in jazz, because we oftentimes talk about the composers, but the songwriters, we used to be the pop music of the day. And so I'm really excited about bringing the art of storytelling back to jazz. And I'm recording my studio album that comes out next year, in collaboration with Larry Klein and Christian McBride, and it's all original music. And I'm just so happy to be here with everybody and telling everyone how much I did not know and still don't, as we all learn together.
I think that, I understand that, we go to school for music and we don't necessarily get all of the advice that we so sorely need. Brian, given that you are, steeped in both as a composer in jazz, but also an orchestrator, how did you learn about protecting your music? And, how does that relate to what you're working on these days?
Sure. Yeah. So I went to Juilliard, like Erica. Uh, and at the time I was there, it was a really unique time to be, studying music, 2009, 10, because the industry was changing so much. You know, we had just gone through this crisis with, music piracy, and now the big streamers were starting to pop up, and people were like, do you know what Spotify is? Do you have, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. What is that? They're like, you can find any album, you can find anything you want, on there. And just really figuring out how to navigate these new challenges that came along with technology. We had a music business class at school, and it was taught by Greg Knowles, who was a former president of the Recording Academy. Um, but a lot of the things that we spoke about in school were not outdated. I mean, they're useful things, but we would talk about mechanical licensing, but we would talk about it in the framework of like, okay, so when you get your record deal, now this is the type, do you want to ask for a recording fund or a recording budget? And then we're dealing with mechanicals. This is what we're going to do. When you go to the club and, someone from Sony Music walks in and just gives you a record deal. And we were like, I don't know how often that's happening anymore. And there was no conversation about releasing your own music because I don't think we were quite there yet. Um, in fact, my first album, uh, I self-funded it using like a newish startup called Kickstarter. And I know that's like a thing that we all use now, but at the time it was so new that I remember like one of either someone who was like on the executive board or one of the co-founders like actually reached out to me and they were like, "Oh yeah, we haven't had a ton of musicians on here, so it's cool to to see that." And learning how to uh, not only self-fund the album and obviously put together the recording package and all of those things, but also learning how to properly register your music. Um, you know, making that I don't think at the time I don't think I did any streaming at the time. I can't really recall 2009, but um, learning how to go through the steps to get it copyrighted and how to join a PRO and make sure that your work is registered correctly. Um, so yeah, there was formal training there, but a lot of it was also just figuring it out as you go and making mistakes along the way. And I remember getting a note from the copyright office saying that I registered something incorrectly and having to
Well, it's
go
nice
back.
to know that people are checking your work, though, especially when you're doing it all yourself.
Well, it was like back in at that time. I think it's all online now, but back at that time, I remember like physically using like the post office and then getting a letter in the mail that was like, we can't approve this because of X, Y, and Z. Opening that in my dorm room and being like, dang it, let me try that again.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and on the Broadway side of things, it's a little bit easier, at least as an orchestrator, because you have such large teams around you and you're working with so many people. And beyond that, a lot of these issues that we're talking about right now are either taken care of for you or they're negotiated, in the beginning when you're putting together like your contract or your agreement to work on a show. So kind of just two different animals.
Mhm.
Jazz tends to be the music where you're you're often in the trenches by yourself. In terms of what I'm working on right now, I last year I premiered a 7 movement oratorio for 35-piece ensemble and for vocal soloist. It features the wonderful Erica von Kleist, who is a part of the project, and we'll be recording it this fall over the course of October and November. So super excited about that.
I am too. Very excited. Thanks, Brian. Um, Ryan, you, your experience, your knowledge, what's your knowledge background in protecting your music, especially since you have the Gil Evans project, which is not necessarily penned by you, but it's curated by you, and there are permissions involved with that. Can you elaborate?
Sure. I might be dating myself slightly, but I went when I went to school, entrepreneurial classes or anything entrepreneurial in music was not existent. So I went through both my undergrad and my grad schools without a single entrepreneurial class. Anything about music business, none of that. It was all just to perfect yourself as a musician and a composer and arranger and all that. So I really did, like Brian said, and Nicole, like I had to learn in the trenches. I would say the nice benefit that I had was post school. I had a lot of mentorship as my kind of gateway into music. I worked for Maria Schneider. I worked for Bob Brookmeyer, the great composer, valve trombonist. And so I got to handle their copyright and handle their legal woes and get to see the ups and downs of the music industry from a kind of peripheral side. So I didn't have to damage myself in my mistakes, but I got to learn from them. And it was an eye-opening experience. I mean, I know we're not here to talk about taxes, but like just to do your taxes as a musician is like something that should be a year-long course in music school, and it's not. So those kind of things I learned kind of on my own, but hugely beneficial. And yeah, in terms of the Gil Evans project, it's a little bit challenging because extra challenging because Gil was primarily a arranger. And so when I'm not even dealing with a lot of Gil's original music, but the music is tied through the Evans family. And so I have agreements with the Evans estate and I have to deal with royalties and permissions and all of that kind of stuff every time I do a record. There was our first record that we did in 2012. I actually wanted to do everything by the book so much so that I had my lawyer. There was one tune that Gil arranged in the 30s that the copyright holder had passed and they hadn't updated any of their files. And so we literally couldn't, it was recorded, it was printed, it was ready to go. And I could not get permission. And back then, this is again, my gosh, I'm going to sound old through this whole thing. But anyway, back then they wouldn't even print your CDs unless you handed them a physical mechanical license. And so they were like, well, we can't print your CD because there was 50% of one tune that was missing. And my lawyer found a grandson in Kansas or something of the lyricist, and they gave us permission in order to do it, and I paid the royalty to them, and now they're getting their payments because they've updated their copyright and their BMI's status and everything for that tune. So it was all of those kind of like bumps along the road that you learn through, and that's why we're having these things so people don't have to go through the trenches like Nicole, Brian, and I did. Hopefully, or at least, I mean, you should go through the trenches a little, but maybe there won't be as deep.
And I'm right there with you in the trenches, man.
Yeah.
It's a jungle, really. Um, Jamie, to kind of bring it back to you with your perspective. So, we've heard all of us talk about doing this ourselves. What does that mean to be self-administered as an artist? And how do we know that this term is applying to you as a composer or as a songwriter?
That's a great question and something that seems so basic, but nothing is basic, is what you start figuring out, right? Like none of this stuff is just common knowledge because it is, like I said before, everything is so nuanced. So none of you are unique in the fact that you all learned in the trenches. Like this is just how it is, even if you go to school for it, it's like you're never fully prepared. I learn things every single day, new things every single day because it's always evolving. And I'm on the business side, so don't feel bad. But yeah, so to be self-administered basically means that you do not have a third party working on your behalf as a publisher or as an administrator. So, oftentimes songwriters will enter into a publishing deal with a third party who will, and again, publishing deals are all different, but essentially, traditionally, the role of a publisher is to sort of help exploit your music and get it placed, or give it more exposure. And in addition to that, they also help you with administrative duties, making sure your works are registered, collecting all the royalty income, et cetera, and making sure you're getting paid. You can also just have an agreement with a solely just an administrative company. So somebody like Song Trust, or Cobalt, or people like that, who just provide admin services. So they're just handling all the business aspects of your catalog. They're not necessarily contributing creatively, but they are making sure that, again, your songs are registered, that they're collecting money in all the territories necessary, and paying all that money back to you. So if you don't have a third party acting on your behalf in those capacities, then you are self-administered, self-published, which I would venture to say is a majority of people, especially in the jazz space. I think that's pretty common. And, I think why this is so important, especially for jazz creators, is that, there is a lack of knowledge and information spread amongst that community, because you're busy playing gigs, you're touring constantly, and so it's tough to stay on top of all of this stuff, and you're not really thinking about, I think as a jazz player, a lot of times you're not really thinking about monetizing in that sense. So yeah, so it's super important, if you don't have a deal with a publisher or or an administrator, to understand all of the revenue streams that are out there for you as a creator.
Well, and to break it down even further, for those who are watching this panel and feeling that overwhelm of like, gosh, what is the first thing I should do? So let's just hypothetically say somebody is writing some new music, planning on going into the studio and releasing their first album. What is the first step that you would recommend somebody to make in terms of protecting their music?
I think most of the time, well, first of all, first step, even when you're in the studio, is to make sure that you have all of your co-writers, collaborators, all of their information, um, in terms of, so that you can register the songs. So this is something that can be touchy for people. They feel awkward doing it, but it doesn't have to be an awkward conversation, because you're all in it together. Everybody wants to get paid. So I think that's really from the start of the creation, just making sure that you have everybody's information, their full legal names, their publishing entities, how you're going to split up the writing and the publishing. All of that is extremely important if you want to get paid before you even start registering the songs. That is the fundamental information you're going to have to provide. So that's number one, I would say. Um, Usually people, their first step in terms of getting registered would be with the PRO, with their performing rights organization. So in the US, that would be ASCAP, CSAC, BMI, are the three main ones that we'll talk about. But yeah, so that's usually step one as a songwriter. Um, so then you can register your entire catalog of works, and make sure that you're getting paid for any performances of your song. And when we say live performances, we're talking about public performances. We're talking about radio, television, live shows. Um, Radio, yeah, I said radio already, but in terms of streaming, you also get performance royalties as well. So super important. I think usually the first step for people is to register with the PRO. um, and then of course there is also sound exchange. So many jazz musicians are also playing on other people's records aside from their own. So as a performer, as a non-featured and featured performer on a sound recording, you are also entitled to performance royalties, and those are paid out for digital performances by Sound Exchange. So even if you didn't write the song, if you performed on a song, you're entitled to those royalties from Sound Exchange for any digital performances of a sound recording that you were featured on. And then last but not least, the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So we are the new kid on the block. We were formed 5 years ago after they passed the Music Modernization Act, and we are tasked with the mission. We were designated by the U.S. Copyright Office to pay streaming mechanical royalties to songwriters and publishers and administrators, that basically the rights holders of a specific work. So again, this is based on the song, not the actual sound recording. We are paying on the publishing side to the songwriters, to the publishers, to the administrators, and these are mechanical royalties from streaming. So I would say those are sort of the three most important things, or the three organizations that you need to register with if you're a songwriter and a composer. If there's one thing you remember, it's to get registered with a PRO, with the MLC, and with Sound Exchange.
That's great advice. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into the Mechanical Licensing Collective and what you guys do. But first, before this leaves my brain, I love what you were talking about having that awkward conversation with your collaborators. There's this sort of amazing synergy between people and teams who are creating music together. And the last thing you want to do is to kill the vibe by having a conversation about, like, okay, well, who's considered this and what percentage of this is mine and all of that. And, as artists, we're like, oh, we're all friends. We're a community. We're all in this together. It's all cool, bro. Yeah, man. When in reality, it's got to be a certain way on paper or else everyone's going to get into a big fight. So, Brian, given that you are in so many collaborative environments, doing what you do, can we start with you? How do you tackle those moments professionally when you have to have those conversations with your colleagues?
Yeah, at first I think it's being introduced to the way like these different environments work. Like if I'm on a pop session, and I'm in the room, generally it's considered like anyone who's in the room while the song is being worked on is a songwriter, and you'll have a conversation about like, oh, how much do you think you contributed, or do we all just want to split the pie evenly? There's even been instances where like a song is written and then, later down the line while they're recording, they're like, we want to add strings to this, or I want an orchestra, or like, can you just do some producer stuff on it and make it sound better? And, of course, we'll give you a few points on it. And it's like, oh yeah, sure, great. Whereas, most of our jazz recording sessions, if I'm just playing drums on a record, or even if I'm just like an arranger on the record, you come in and the person whose name is at the top of the sheet, it's their composition. Anything that I contribute is considered work for hire. And similarly in theater, I've been in situations where, a composer or a lyricist will be like, hey, there's a scat solo that needs to go in here, but of course we're going to mark this and write. Do you want to write something for no credit? And you understand what these relationships are and how these environments work. Um, and I think understanding that helps to make things much less awkward. If I'm in a string section and a classical composer is, asking me about a bowing, I'm not going to be like, well, I'll tell you what the bowing is, but you owe me 5 points on this composition. Just understanding the environments that you're going into and where the line is. You know, I've I've been in situations where someone's like, hey, can you arrange something for me? I want a big band orchestra arrangement of this. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they send me a voice note that's like, ba da dum da da da, da, da. I'm like, okay, so great. Actually, what you're looking for is a co-writer, and I'd love to collaborate with you on this. And so yeah, that's just
Yeah.
my own view.
Well, and also just be having the moxie to just be like, okay, here's the line. Here's you stand up for yourself in those moments to be like, okay, let's just go ahead and have the awkward conversation and get it over with. And going into that with the knowledge that you need about the nuance of those moments. I think that's something that, you can be informed of technically, but I think that really does come with experience, I would imagine, just
Absolutely.
knowing how to approach those. Nicole, uh, can you talk about collaboration? I mean, one of your main collaborators is your husband, Dan Pugach, who's an incredible big band composer, arranger, and drummer and leader. And you collaborate with many musicians. Can you speak to some of your experience?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can marry a collaborator. That's always an option, I guess. But if you don't, I mean, that's been an interesting thing to watch him kind of live with what Brian was just speaking about, where someone asks him to do an arrangement, or is it an orchestration? You know, or are we writing the song together? And also, as an educator, and a lot of people are in education, sometimes when I'm with a student and they bring a song to me, I end up just writing the song with them. And I'm not, because of the position I'm in, I'm not gonna be like, and now let's go register that song and give me 50%. It's just, even though sometimes the songs end up being really great, it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. And for me, collaborating with Dan, oftentimes I write the song with the lyric and the harmony, and then he completely blows it up. Like our song Little Fears. Um, I held him. I said, if you don't arrange the song for big band, I'm gonna I'm gonna throw a fit. And so I wrote the song, and I wrote the chords, and then he could, I don't hear it for a big band. I'm like, yes, you do. And then what happens is that we share the credit, because everything that he writes in the horns, I have nothing to do with. Same thing with our arrangements. We have an arrangement of Jolene where it was just me and the piano, and then he blew it up for horns and wrote all these beautiful things. So we just share it. And that's kind of the Nashville way to think about it. I learned that when I was down in Nashville. What Brian said, whoever is in the room gets an even split. And so for me, as I'm writing songs for myself, I'm very protective of who I let into my songwriting moment. If it's a co-writing session, that's what I call it. Hey, do you want to have a session? And then we're co-writing it together. And if there's a producer on it, that person probably already contractually has a percentage coming out later, not as the songwriter, but on the actual, pro- recording. So they get their cut later. That, like, the producers can get their cut for what they add later contractually, depending on how they're living with the song. But in the beginning, I didn't really understand, and there's a couple of songs where I just showed someone the song, and then I have a voice memo where going, I'm working on this thing. I'm working on this song. Check it out. And there's one recording of the person going, la, 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 la. And maybe there's two or three notes. And then later I recorded it and I go, wait a minute. What if this person hears the song and thinks that they wrote it? And so you have to have the hard conversation. I said, how much of this do you think you wrote? Are you happy with 25% as a courtesy? And of course, they're going to say yes. But it's hard conversations and making sure that you have them. And later, we could talk about when you write songs for pop, like Brian said. I've had experiences where I wrote a song for a major artist, and then later, even though I wrote it fully and they pretty much released it fully as I wrote it, I end up sharing the percentage with whoever was in the room. So just be mindful in jazz and beyond that if someone is in the room as you're writing it, you have to give credit where credit is due, even if it's just one note. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think,
And
yeah,
can
it
I
boils
add
down.
one quick little thing?
Oh, yeah, please,
The
Ryan.
the one thing I will say to Nicole's point, and what Brian was saying too, is that it's much easier and cheaper to have the conversation ahead of time than to be sued later on by someone that felt that they had one note or 5% involved in that, and then you have to go to court and it's a whole big messy thing. Might as well just have the conversation up front, get it done, have it in writing, contract is done, and then move on, copacetic, everything's great.
Well,
You
and then
took the
also,
words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was gonna say, Ryan.
and Ryan, you have come at it so many times as a co-producer, as ears behind the board for so many artists, you know, having to negotiate for in that capacity too, I imagine is like, you know, you don't want to kill the vibe, but you also have to have that conversation on how you're going to be compensated for your input.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to Brian and Nicole talk about this, and I'm like, I don't know if I really fit into this because I don't do a lot of collaboration as a large ensemble writer. I mean, it's that guy that has to collaborate with, and it's like that. I don't know that I have a lot of collaborative stuff, but I have been involved in enough recordings and producing recordings and as an arranger and just enough like uh there's a lot of like copyright infringement, like when you do an arrangement and you want to do it kind of like a bassy arrangement, and then all of a sudden you start stealing Little Darlin' without thinking about it, and like, oh, is that, where does that lie? Do you have to give credit to, the arranger? Is that your own composition and then you stole Little Darlin', and then you've got to give some points there? So it's a little bit kind of a gray area, which I think all of it is. But I think the biggest thing that I can contribute to this is that, especially in a recording sense, to do all of this work before the last minute. I think Jamie said it, like before you walk into the studio, now that I've learned it, I know before I walk into the studio, before I even do the arrangement, can I get mechanical royalties paid easily to this chart? Because if I go and all of a sudden it's not in Harry Fox and I can't do it, then I got to pay a lawyer to go and go find somebody that is going to allow me to do this, and it's not worth it to me. So now I'm going to switch the tune that I'm going to arrange versus where I was in 2012 that I mentioned earlier, where the record was done and at the printers, mastered, recorded. I spent a ton of money on it, and all of a sudden I'm not going to be able to release a track because I don't have 50% permission to release this tune. So you just don't want to be in those kind of positions. And as a producer, I don't know, I do so much jazz and classical production versus like pop or like singer-songwriter things that I'm not, you're making me think that I've like missed out on things in the past. But like, I offer suggestions, kind of like Nicole was saying with education, like I'll be in the booth and I'll hear an arrangement and I'll be like, this is what I think would actually make it a better arrangement. What if you do this part here? And what if we just take this part out and then we do it? And then we record it and the band is like, oh, that's great. That's great. Next tune. And I'm not going to say like, okay, where's my point for that? Because it's kind of like, I'm just here to help. That's why I got paid the money to come be a producer. Now, if I was sitting down, like Nicole and Brian said, if I was sitting down with someone and I was like, okay, what do you want this to sound like? Let's work it out together. Of course, then we have to have a conversation. But for the most part, wow, I'm going to get a reputation of as like this freewheeling free producer, but but it's but it's true. Like it's the bottom line of what all of us have said is there's a very, very fine line between where you get where you have ownership in something and where you're just kind of a collaborator. And it really is, like I said before, it's so important to have that conversation up front, because you do not want to have it with a judge present, because that's no fun.
Yeah. Well, and in the spirit of like just starting right, starting getting off on the right foot, just doing it right initially, to bring it back to you, Jamie, and the MLC. So, can you just break it down? What is the MLC? What does it do for composers? And what problems has it solved, or what sort of things has it helped tie together for artists to make this less overwhelming and just more understandable and feasible?
So yeah, as I mentioned before, we were created out of law. So when they passed the Music Modernization Act, which was basically updating old, antiquated copyright laws, which weren't reflective of the streaming era. So basically, we were put in place, we were created because prior to our existence, say from the period of like 2007 to 2020, we were officially formed in 2020. The Music Modernization Act was passed in 2018. But in that time frame from 2007 to 2020, when that streaming became the main way people were consuming music. And in the beginning, all of these streaming services that were popping up, they they were responsible for obtaining all the licenses individually for all the rights holders. So you can imagine that this is a very cumbersome, inefficient method, and a lot of, particularly the independents, aren't going to be covered. Okay, so they would immediately go to the big record labels, publishers, and do deals with them to make sure that they obtain licenses from all of them. But what about everybody in between, meaning you, the independents, right? So that's where the MLC really came into play and why we were created out of this law. So we are the sole entity that is responsible for administering a blanket license to all of the streaming platforms. So that means that there's one license um, that covers all of the creators and what sorry, the rights holders, I should say. Um, and what the MLC is responsible for doing is administering this license to them and also collecting all of the royalties that are due to be paid out, that a lot of times were previously being held by the streaming services because they didn't know who to pay if you weren't covered under the licenses, that fell under the labels, the major labels or the major publishers. So they were just holding on to millions and millions of dollars. It was hundred and $37 million, I believe. Um, so we basically were created so that we would be that sort of centralized agency to handle the admin of the license and then also collect the money and pay it to all of the rights holders, which means you the songwriters and the composers. Um, and we also were mandated to create a public database so that this database would be accessible to anybody. You don't have to be a member, and it contains all of the rights holder information for all of the songs that are streaming on any platform. So if you're trying to find the writer to a song for a song or a publisher for a song and you're having a hard time locating them, go to the MLC's public database because you can find it there. I know beforehand, a lot of people don't know this. So I'm saying that now because if there's something, if you're, adapting another, song or something that you want to use, um, as part of your composition, then this is a good place to start. Whereas before, you kind of had to piecemeal it, do a lot of Googling, go to all the PRO websites. A lot of times you will find that information on our public database. So those are the three main things: the licensing, we're paying out the royalties to the songwriters, and we are also charged with maintaining this database so that all the information is transparent and accessible to everybody. We're also a nonprofit, so that's also very unique because the streaming services also cover our overhead. They pay all of our operating costs. This is by law. And that money is a completely separate bucket. So what that means is that it doesn't come out of your royalties. We're not charging an admin fee. We're not taking a commission. We are simply here designated by the law to make sure that you, the songwriters, the creators, are getting paid your royalties every time your music is streamed. So that's essentially what we do in a nutshell. And we, since we formed in 2020 and our first operational year was in 2021, we've paid out over $3.5 billion in streaming mechanical royalties to songwriters. And of that black box money that I mentioned before, we've paid out, I think we're close to 60% of that being paid. So, there's still a lot of ground to cover because, as you know, songwriters are everywhere and they're hard to find and you can be very elusive. So, um, so I'm just saying all this because please spread the word to all of your, all of your friends, your colleagues, your peers, your collaborators. I guarantee a majority of them probably haven't even heard of us. We're still, and specifically in the jazz community, we're really making a push to really make a dent in your community. So, yeah, help us, please.
Well, and I know that writers can become members of the MLC. There's that database is huge. I know as somebody who has registered my own music and has searched for licenses, it can be like, where do I look? Oh, look in this site, look on that site. I have to contact the publisher directly. Like, how do I do this? So that is a huge way of tying the community together and to make this easier, because part of the reason why we lose money on royalties is because it's just not easy. We just don't know what we're supposed to do. Um, I think everybody should go to the Mechanical Licensing Collective's website, check it out. It's filling a huge hole in this world that we exist in as composers and doing a great service to us. So thank you, Jamie, so much for pioneering all of this and making this happen.
Of
You
course.
know, I think it's important that we remember those early steps that you mentioned, Jamie, like the performing rights organizations, and getting signed up with ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, or any of those that you would be a part of. But also, like you mentioned, like composers and songwriters tend to be kind of elusive and hard to find. How can we make ourselves easier to find and less elusive and more involved, and just easier to be a part of the, I don't know how I'm trying to ask this, but a little bit easier to be in the mix here, easier to find, easier to pay out our royalties to? Like, what do we need to do?
First and foremost, going back to having all of the information, all of the data that I spoke about earlier, in terms of your collaborators, it's just really important because technology moves so fast and everything's going to keep evolving. Um, at the core, you always need to make sure that all of your ownership metadata is accurate and it's up to date. You can't just register your song 10 years ago, and things change, and then just leave your catalog, and never look at it again. It's maintenance is part of your responsibility as well if you're doing it yourself. So, just always make sure that all of that information is up to date, so that going forward through all these changes in technology, and you at least that information is correct, and they can always find you the rights holder and get you paid. That I think is fundamentally super super important. And then again, making sure you're registered at all those three organizations. The MLC is free to join, so if you're not already a member and you are self-administered and self-published, be sure to do that as soon as possible. It's very possible that we have money just sitting there waiting for you to get paid out. So that could be, if you're going on tour and you need some extra cash, could be just we might have it for you. So yeah, I would say that those are really good places to start, is just making sure the metadata is accurate, up to date, and getting registered with all those organizations.
Yeah. Well, now I know my to-do list just got a lot longer because there are some things that have been on there for many years that need a relook. So thank you for that reminder. I think this industry is full of amazing, wonderful people who are collaborators, who are colleagues. I think 95% of the people I meet in this industry are good-hearted people who just want to make great music. And then there's also people you meet who are looking to take advantage of artists. You know, because there's always a potential for a huge payout with when it comes to, you know, ownership of music. You know, I want to start with you, Ryan, with this question because you came and spoke at my music business class at Manhattan School of Music, which is one of the reasons we're having this panel, because it was just such a good discussion that you had with my students that day. And one of the things you were saying was about like, don't necessarily partner with a label or a publishing company unless that deal really works for you. Like, don't get caught up in like the, oh, somebody wants me, I'm getting signed, that kind of vibe. Make sure that you are looking into how this is going to work for you in the long term. And maybe if you can speak to those protections or that sort of mentality of protection that an artist can have when not falling prey to those moments.
Sure. I'm going to try to do this and not be the Debbie Downer of the group. I think that most this day and age, I think anytime when a label approaches you, or you reach out to labels, or you reach out to distributors or publishers or anybody, maybe you're a songwriter and you have a bunch of demo tapes. Oh my God, I'm dating myself again. You send out a bunch of demos to a bunch of people, and you know, somebody picks up your song that they like, you know, maybe some very famous, very popular artist likes your song, and they decide to write it, and you're like, oh, I'm just so excited that I'm trying not to drop names because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm pointing out someone in particular, but you know, like some very famous person that plays stadiums or whatever is picking up your song, and you're just like, fine, I just want my song to be performed all over the world, and you give it up. And then all of a sudden, you know, 2 years later, after it's hit Billboard charts and all these things, and maybe you won a Grammy and for, you know, recording of the year or something like that, and then you're left there, you know, counting your $5 checks from some little jazz tune that you wrote on one record. And so it's very easy to, you know, see that as an accomplishment that so and so has recorded your song, but in the end, you're just going to end up with no money and no protection and no rights to it. And I think a really good example, which ironically I watched on the plane, a plane ride that I took yesterday, the Billy Joel documentary. I don't know if anyone's seen that yet, but it's really fascinating. And I think it was very poignant that I decided to watch this on this plane ride, because the very beginning of Billy's career, his first record contract that he signed because it was a record deal and he wanted to just get his songs out. And he was this kind of scrappy young songwriter from Long Island. I hope I'm getting this right, Billy. I apologize if I'm missing some details. But the thing that I learned is, you know, down the road, he signed this contract. The first record came out. The guy that was his producer, that owned the record label, he says in the video, he didn't know what he was doing. He ended up, in order to fit the track on the record for the amount of time that they had, he sped it up. So Billy Joel sounds like a chipmunk on the first record that came out so that it would fit in the time. And he had no control over it. Well, so he decides to leave. And a couple of records later, when he's signed by Columbia Records, they go back. And sure enough, this guy owns all of Billy Joel's publishing, all of his songwrite copyright, and he's tied into this record label. So if you look at all of his Columbia records that came out, they're stamped with this guy's name. And this guy made, I think the thing in the record or in the video was 25 cents per record that Billy Joel sold went to this first contract, even though he only did that first record with him. And I didn't watch, there's two parts. I haven't watched the second part, so I haven't found out how he got out of it. But but anyway, it's a very poignant thing. Is like all of a sudden Billy Joel was just so desperate to get not desperate, but you know, he wanted a contract. It was offered to him. He took it, and that Columbia Records couldn't get him out of it. That's how ironclad this contract was that he signed. And so that is a great example of, you know, until you're Billy Joel famous down the road, when you can afford to hire mega lawyers to somehow get you out of that, you know, you very easily could have a hit record on your hand that you make no money from. And that's where you have to watch out and read every line and consult lawyers and consult colleagues, you know, like I can tell you from this panel alone, if I'm ever collaborating with someone on something, I'm going to go to Brian and Nicole because they seem to be experts more than I am on how to split those how to find those fine lines. But anyway, yeah, I think it's just really important to that no one really tells you to protect yourself. And what we're not taught is how to protect ourselves in a legal and admin kind of way. We're taught how to write music and we want to make great music, and we're taught that our goal as musicians is for people to hear it. But truthfully, for us to be professionals and to be able to eat and have a roof over our head, we have to do all those things and get paid for it. And so you have to make sure that you're aware of all of those things that Jamie's talking about, what everybody else is talking about, to really be aware of those things and look into them. And it takes time and it sucks. I'm going to speak for everybody else in this panel that we have all spent time that we would much rather be making music, sitting there searching websites for random forms and other crap that we had to fill. Oops, sorry, that we have to fill out. And so anyway, it's worth the time because it's gonna, you never know where that's gonna be necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And always having yourself in the back of your mind and resisting those dreamy temptations to sign on the dotted line.
And can I just say one other thing? In terms of, Jamie's been talking about streaming, and I think that this is a really interesting time that we live. I know everybody wants to dog on streaming because of and there's very many reasons to do so. But the best thing that streaming, I think, has done is it's made music wildly available to people, and they don't have to search your name in order to get it. They just have to listen to their sleepy time playlist that you happen to be on, and all of a sudden they hear this very cool ethereal piece that you wrote, and it's some director of a movie that happens to hear it, and they're like, I want my movie, I want that in my movie. And if you don't have your metadata set up, if you don't have your copyrights in order, that director is going to use your music, and you're going to show up to a movie theater and hear your own music being played, and no one's going to have ever called you. And I know people that has happened to. And I know also other people that have had directors and various other things, commercials and things like that, hear their music on some cool jazz playlist or something like that, and then had everything in order. And now all of a sudden this commercial is really wanting to use this piece of music of yours, and they have to come to you, and you have to have lawyers, and they all talk about it, and then you get a cut of the pie, and then it goes on and you become worldly famous in a Nissan commercial. But but it's all, I mean, that's how you have to really protect yourself in the streaming world, is because your music is being available even though it's not through you, if that makes sense. It doesn't have to be searched, but you know, people don't have to look for Brian to find his music. It's going to pop up and they won't even know it's connected to Brian, but Brian's got his stuff lined up. And so if they want to use it in any capacity, they eventually have to come to Brian in order to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a double-edged sword on many levels. Brian and Nicole, to the point of, resisting the urge to sign on the dotted line, do you have any life experience to that end? Oh, actually, let's hold for a minute. Jamie, I know that you need to sign off soon.
I do. Unfortunately, I double booked myself tonight. So, but I did want to say before I jump off, to the point earlier that I made about the historical money that we were paying out in phases that was being held previously. First of all, I didn't give you the right number. It was $427 million, not 137. So I had to clarify that because it is a huge amount. But to that point, I just want to reiterate that we're not going to be sitting on that money forever. We are going to eventually have to redistribute that money by market share. So what that means is that if you're not already registered and you think, if you're not a MLC member yet and you think we might have money that's being held for you, from that time frame, of these historical earnings, get registered ASAP because you don't want that money to go to someone else. So there is a sense of urgency. But no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and it was such a pleasure and an honor to be amongst all of my esteemed panelists. And yeah, any follow us on social media. We have a lot of resources, and we do a lot of webinars and in-person outreach events for creators. So and like I said before, our website really has a plethora of information if you ever feel lost and you need some educational resources. We've got them.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and we definitely will. We appreciate you being here, your knowledge and your time. Thank you again so much, Jamie.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah,
I'm gonna jump in
yeah, go for it.
while while it's fresh in my brain. I think that jazz artists and artists in general, along the lines of what Ryan said and Erica, you've alluded to, is that you should own your masters as much as you possibly can, because then when it comes to publishing deals or sync opportunities, they want a one-stop shop. They don't want to go through multiple people in order to get permissions to use your song. So if you don't own your master, they're going to be like, well, who do I have to contact? And yada, yada, yada. Like the more you own your catalog, the more appealing you are to getting a publishing deal. And you can do admin deals. Like if you don't have someone like my lawyer helps admin all my PROs, Sound Exchange, MLC, Sound Exchange, MLC, PROs. Those are the three things that you need to do. But you can also go to like Song Trust and try and do that. They take a higher percentage. But if you're a busy working musician, sometimes that's helpful. And another thing to think about um, is that if you're offered in jazz $20,000 at the moment, it feels like, wow, this record label is offering me 20 grand. That's so incredible. But what are they taking? They're taking either your masters or half of your masters. They're only giving you that as an advance. They do not tell you what the recoup is. So that 20,000 is more like you owe them now 100,000. So um, you can license your albums to boutique labels where you own your full masters, like boutique labels like Outside In, La Reserve. Um, you license to them and they take their percentage much smaller, almost like an admin deal. And it's so much better for you because then when it comes to sync, you are in charge of the master and you own it. And like Ryan said, you never know what's going to happen. And, may we all be rolling in the jazz sync dough after, because we took care of our admin.
That's great advice. It's something that we don't always think about. And again, $20,000 feels really bright and shiny in the first moment, and then 5 years down the road might not seem like so much. So, Brian, any thoughts on resisting the deal, making sure you get the right deal?
Maybe not the deal, but something came to mind. I was working on a project, and I had spoken to a songwriter and gotten their blessing to record, and their encouragement, like, you should record this song. This would be great. And record the song and spend all the money and do all the things. And we're about to release, and we come to find out that the person who was the songwriter wasn't actually the songwriter, and that there was another person who was, behind the song, and this person more just wrote new lyrics. And so it created this whole new process of us having to go back and clear. And we were very lucky that we caught it before we released, because that would have been a very, very costly mistake. And so we took the time, and there was a whole thing like trying to get in contact with the actual songwriter and get their blessing and their permission. And it all ended up, working out. But yeah, I'm glad that I didn't rush to press. You know, when you make new music, especially music that you're proud of, it's really it can be difficult to like sit on things and make sure that all your ducks are in a row. But
Yeah.
that sort of came to mind.
Yeah. No, that's also really, really important, making sure you have all the correct knowledge going into a release because it's really hard to backtrack. And speaking of releases, I know that there are several people on this call who might be sitting on some of their own music and maybe sitting on some things that they've been wanting to record and wanting to release. And we're coming to the end of our time this evening, and I kind of wanted to close it out by asking you all, like, if there's one like small piece of advice that you would give to a first time, someone who's releasing their music for the first time, recording it the first time, getting it out there. What's one piece of advice? It doesn't necessarily have to be business related. It can be encouragement, aesthetic, technical, logistical. But in terms of releasing your first, thing, whether it's a single or an album, what would you say to somebody who's doing that for the first time? Maybe we'll start with, I don't know, Ryan.
I was hoping the other two would set me up for that. What's what's a piece of advice? I mean, I think we've driven home a lot of the points. The I'm going to sound old again, but like the nice thing is the internet has a ton of information. And now at the beginnings of, AI and whatnot, it's an easy little AI thing for you to go in there and be like, I'm releasing my first record. What do I need to know? And I haven't done it myself, but I bet AI would come up with a pretty hefty list of, the performing arts organizations and all of those other things. And so I would just say to I guess I'm going to piggyback off of what Brian just said, not to be too excited. I mean, you should be excited about your first release, but not to rush it, not to just throw it away in the same sense that I was talking about, or in the analogy of the Billy Joel thing, where it's just like, I want my first record deal. I don't care what happens. I just want to be recorded. And now, you have all these years, you never know if you're going to be the next Billy Joel or whoever, Lady Gaga or Miley Cyrus or somebody like that. And so it's good to just make sure that all your I's are and T's are crossed and dotted, and that you have everything in a row. And I guess I'm going to take two pieces of advice. I never thought I wanted to hire a lawyer because I knew that they were expensive, and I was like, it's just not worth the money. It is very expensive. That's not a lie. But I will say it is money well spent, because they know so much more about the intricacies of these little tiny, like, article 11 BC 3 1 whatever. They know all that stuff, and it's somewhere down the road you're going to be very thankful you paid a couple $100 for 20 minutes of a lawyer's time. So, and an accountant. Get yourself a lawyer and an accountant.
Oh, yeah. Making that investment in yourself is worth every single penny. Nicole, anything to add? Going in the studio, recording
Sure.
your first album.
I'd say get excited about imagining yourself like you're the CEO of your own company, because besides all the uh, admin things that we just talked about here, there's so much more admin that comes with releasing an album, such as registering Spotify for artists, Amazon for artists, a title for artists, Apple Music for artists, bands in town, Songkick. The list goes on and on. And so just, thinking it to yourself, I have full control over my artistry. This is so exciting, as opposed to I'm drowning in admin, has helped my mental health. And then the other thing is that it's just a snapshot. Like the first album that you put out is just a snapshot. And you're going to put out so much more. So just do the work so that you're not playing catch up um, later. Don't rush out the album before if you go into the session, bring your work for hire sheets. Make sure you do all the things we talked about here. Don't be like me, learn it over the course of 20 years. This session has been so helpful for me. I learned so much and good reminders. But music is never going to be perfect. So just make the thing too. Just make the thing.
I love that. Just do it. Just make the thing. Just do it. And Brian, lastly.
Yeah, I think it's all been said. Just go in with a strong sense of preparation, and also go in with a willingness to, laugh off the mistakes that you make, because you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna screw something up, and you just can't don't let it take the whole project. When something doesn't clear and you can't put it on, you can't upload it, or something gets that's gonna happen. And I love what Nicole says. I always try to think about that. A recording is just a snapshot of a moment in time. So you can look back 10, 15, 20 years ago and be like, oh yeah, that's where I was then. Great. That's what I was thinking about. That's what I was hearing.
Yeah. And you're right, Brian. There will be mistakes, both musical and everything going on in the background. Like you said, Nicole, drowning in admin. Like something's going to fall through the cracks, and it's okay. And that's why we have, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. We have, our colleagues we can always ping and talk to. We've got great resources like the Recording Academy, and also ISJAC, the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers. So, I think it's important to know that you are not an island. You are not doing this yourself, and there are many, many people asking all the same questions that you are. And hopefully we have been able to answer some of those questions on today's panel. And I know I learned a lot. I'm so grateful for Ryan, Brian, Nicole, and Jamie for all of your knowledge, and just all of your stories about everything you're working on, your history. It is a constant learning process, and I think that's part of the beauty of it. And I'm honored to be along on this journey with all of you guys as a fellow composer and jazz musician. Thank you to Lynn, Chris, and Susan at the Songwriters and Composers Wing. Thank you to Jamie and the MLC. And thank you to ISJAC. And this has been wonderful. And this will be posted on YouTube, at least partially, at a later date. So check back then, and you'll be able to watch it again then. So thank you all for signing on, and have a great evening.